So with your leave, can I take questions 6 and
Yes, please proceed.
7 together? So we hold a clear position on the preaching of religious intolerance, and we draw a line on teachings that seek to divide our society along religious lines. Second, we should also be clear that a foreigner's entry into Singapore is neither automatic nor a right. It's a privilege. It will only be granted if we assess that his entry will not harm Singapore's interests. So in this context, a foreigner who wants to deliver a talk in Singapore, the talk is related to religion, race, or politics, he has to obtain a miscellaneous work pass from Ministry of Manpower because the issues are sensitive. MOM will consult other agencies in assessment of the MWP applications. Each application is assessed on its own merits through a process. From a security perspective, one of the principles is that the foreigner should not have antecedents of radical preachings and teachings. For example, if he has advocated violence or promoted segregationist, intolerant teachings that are inimical to our multiracial, multi-religious society, he will not be allowed in. It is not material whether the previous comments were made in relation to Singapore or whether they intend to touch on these issues when they speak here. If they hold those views that are inappropriate or unacceptable in our context, then it is not in our national interest to give them a platform in Singapore, whether to propagate their teachings or to build up their followings. It is also not material to consider how large their following is in Singapore. We should be concerned if even a small number in Singapore take in their radical, intolerant, or segregationist teachings. And really, we should not allow them to preach or speak here to spread these viewpoints among Singaporeans and really build up anger amongst the different faiths. Mr. Zaki Mohammed asked about the effectiveness of banning such foreigners given the accessibility of digital platforms. There are obviously limits to the extent to which we can prevent access to such content, in particular through the internet. But this does not mean that we should make it even easier for such foreigners to spread their views more directly, personally to Singaporeans, and build up a following here by allowing them to come into Singapore and giving them a physical platform. Preaching and grandstanding live and in person is quite different, a proposition from doing so on the internet. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Muhammad Faisal.
I would like to thank the Minister for his reply. Just have one supplementary. Just want to know whether did the Minister engage these foreign religious preachers to give them an opportunity to explain themselves prior to the imposition of the ban or after the ban be imposed in a way to allow them to make an appeal against the ban. Thank you.
Let's take someone who says, referring to Islam, Islam, communism, and other societal problems, such as human trafficking, are referred to as Goliaths standing at our door. He had also described Allah as a false god, asked for prayers for those held captive in the darkness of Islam, refers to Buddhists as Tohu people, which is a Hebrew word for lost, lifeless, confused, spiritually barren. Do you think we should invite him into Singapore and give him an interview? Let me know.
Yes, Mr. Faisal.
So I believe the minister didn't answer my question. Just want to know whether does the process involve a channel for an appeal to be made?
I asked, saying we look at specific facts. Will you answer my question so that we can take this discussion further?
So I don't mind, can I ask minister to repeat his question?
Yes. Let's say I started out by saying often it'll be quite clear whether we should or we shouldn't allow. And I gave you a passage. Let's say a preacher says the following, describes Islam, communism, and other societal problems, including human trafficking, categorizing all of them together as Goliaths standing at our door, describes Allah as a false god, asks for prayers for those held captive in the darkness of Islam, refers to Buddhists as Tohu people, which is a Hebrew word for lost, lifeless, confused, spiritually barren individuals who can be saved by converting to Christianity. Do you believe we should invite him into Singapore and interview him? Or should we ban him outright?
Yes, Mr. Muhammad Faisal.
So I've officially stated my stand on this issue when we discussed in this chamber on the private motion moved by Mr. Christopher regarding the using multiculturalism approach as a weapon fighting against the terrorism. So my simple answer to Minister is no.
That is the approach we take.
Okay, Mr. Zaghi Muhammad.
Thank you, Minister. I have a question on the issue of context. It's a tricky one because many scriptures of the various religions do deal with non-believers, and many religious leaders and preachers have had to address this and speak on such topics when they're overseas. So it may not be easy for them sometimes to align the speeches, in the context of multiracialism or multi-religialism to what we believe in here in Singapore. We are an exception. So how do you differentiate whether it is truly their views or is it a context of which they were giving that speech or preach or sermon in those countries? And how can we do more to have our own religious leaders to also counter such radical beliefs? Thank you.
It has a number of different facets. If you look at it within Singapore and then you look at it outside of Singapore. Within Singapore, we're very clear on the framework. We have complete freedom of religion. We encourage the different faiths to carry on. You've seen the consequences. We are ranked as one of the most religiously diverse societies in the world. So we guarantee freedom of religion, including to the minorities, and in fact, we support them. And both MPs as well as office holders turn up in many of these events. The line that we draw, and if you look at it, the Penal Code has legal provisions. The Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act has a framework. But essentially, if I were to identify one principle, do not do harm unto others. Do not advocate violence. Do not put down somebody else's religion. Right? And as long as you keep to that, propagate your faith. That, I think, has seen us being an oasis of religious peace in a world that is highly troubled. So when we look at foreign preachers, we will have to look at who is bringing them in. We will have to talk to them. And we will have to look at the context of their sayings. But on the whole, we take a fairly conservative approach in that whatever you have said elsewhere, if those represent your viewpoints, like what I just said, if someone calls Allah a false god, and then he wants to come into Singapore and say, well, that was in a different context, I think it nevertheless runs a serious risk of people following such a preacher, and then they go on to look at what else he has said elsewhere, and the context is not always apparent to people to be understood. So I think it's better for us to be careful.